Now to talk about integrations. And I'm going to be introducing Alan Kent, who's our chief architect. As Ben mentioned, I'm a member of the product team, and I get a lot of the back-end pieces, but I also have APIs, and basically get to talk about integration and figure out how we're going to help doing that from a business side. Now, all of you probably have a smartphone in your pocket. How many of you have a smartwatch on? Yeah, a fair number of you with smartwatches. How many of you are walking around with a Fitbit or exercise tracker? Yeah, we got a lot of people there. So all that data is out there. It's being sent via APIs into the cloud, into a variety of systems. And with that information, businesses are using big data to go get richer analytics and figure out how to market to you or how to provide more value to you. So really, when we think about this decade that we're in now and going forward, it's an explosion of mobile devices. Marketers' biggest concern is getting in front of a customer and providing message, providing value to them. And really, this is where we're starting to say it's all about integrations. How do I stitch all my back office systems together? How do I stitch that into Magento? And how do I deliver a marketing message, a product, value to my customer base? Now, I'd like to hand over the mic to Alan Kent, who's going to lead us through some of the features we have in Magento 2 to integrate.
Anton mentioned a little bit before that, so if you're wondering what our two roles are, Anton is primarily responsible for the digital commerce, which is a traditional web store, but Magento is now a lot more products. So there's order management, we've got the marketplace, we've got a whole lot of different things that are now fall underneath the Magento name. And so I'm across all of them, and so I get to dabble in the digital commerce side. But if you really want the details, then people like Anton and the team and the other people presenting, they know a lot more about it. I often describe myself as knowing a little bit about a lot of different things on the product range. But if you need the extra depth, there's a great team of people behind it all. So who was here for the first session this morning? Most people? Cool, so you might recognize this guy. Meet Adam. So apart from being a product manager at Magento, what you might not know about Adam is he builds his own commerce site on the side. And he gets lots of specialist expertise. Oh, hang on. Adam, are you here? No, he's not here. Oh, well, okay, maybe he's just used our normal site. But I'm going to be talking about a typical sort of merchant. He's got his small sort of site up and going. Hey, he's got some sales going. It's taking off. He's doing well. But the question is, how does he get the business site to the next level? You started off with a small site. It's fairly easy to start off with a smart with Magento. You can get the product data into it. You can get your orders flowing. But how do you get it going beyond? What are the sort of the challenges that come up? So, of course, Magento is the center of the universe, and I'm talking about the digital web store here. But there's a number of different integration points that we frequently hear about, and you've probably got your own ones as well. And so I'm going to run through a few of them. So one is a product information manager. So you can type all your products directly into Magento and use Magento to manage them. But there are also products out there that are custom designed for doing this. They do a better job of the image management. If you've got to publish your information to Amazon and eBay, like different marketplaces, there is a range of products out there called product information managers. And if you want to use them, you might want to say, that is my master source of data to get onto the store. So how do you get that integration going? Another sort of integration is there's order management. So of course, there's only one order management system out there that, of course, isn't there. And you all know that Magento now has an order management system. Everybody nods and says, a few people nodded, good. Yeah, there are other ones out there. I'm just throwing up some sample ones. This is not product endorsement. I'm just picking some at random. But order management systems is the sort of a typical problem is you can do order management in digital commerce, but as your organization grows, you might have multiple warehouses, you might want to do better customer service integrations, and it's a quite common problem to sort of say, how do I integrate with these other systems to make it easier to manage my site? There are, of course, SaaS connectors, and we want to make it easier for people doing extensions that are really SaaS services. There's more and more of them. It's a common industry trend. And so we've got to work out how to make it easier to integrate with such services, either ones that we provide or other products that other people provide. You've also got marketplaces. I'm talking about eBay and Amazon. How do you keep the stock in sync? You've got native mobile apps. If you want to build your own native application for your own mobile device and have a more customized experience for your customer base, it's not suitable for everybody, but how do you make it easy to hook that onto your store? Because you want to share the same data. You want to have it so if you go to an order, your pricing is all in sync and so forth. And then you get into the more newer sort of stuff. There's all these buy buttons that are appearing all over the place. There's new technology advances going on all the time. And then this is where legal review came in and said, have you got the copyright for all these images? And I said, no, unfortunately. So I can't show you pictures of internet refrigerators and all the Amazon buy buttons and all these weird and wonderful things that are going to come that we can think of now, but it's going to be more and more of this sort of work. How do you get all of these things integrated? And so what was one of the challenges we took on with Magento 2 was to try and lower the amount of work you've got to do. We can't do it all. We can't just give you an out-of-the-box solution that will solve everything. But we want to reduce the amount of effort with Magento 2 to make these sorts of integrations possible. So poor Adam with his store, he's got to work out how to get the costs down. So let's think for a moment. There's two sorts of, of course there's a merchant. But if I sort of say who develops a site, I really put it into two sort of groups. There are the extension developer community and there's solution partners. Now, frequently solution partners also build extensions, and it gets a bit blurry, but they're really two sorts of groups of people. The extension developers are worrying about, I got to go off and write business logic. Now, I want to implement the functionality for something. The solution partners are trying to wire a site together. Well, they don't always have complete control over the site. They might have some existing technology, the customer might have particular standards, and so how do you sort of get these people to work together? So what we want to do, or what we've done in Magento 2, is we've done a lot of work around separating the business logic from the configuration of how to wire things through onto the actual protocols. So that an extension developer can just focus on writing code and they don't need to know what protocol is being used. And on the solution partner side, we give them control over what protocol to use. And we're going to talk about this a bit more. So we're going to talk about several things in the coming up slides. One, I'm going to talk about the authentication processes, the different ways we've got different scenarios you need authentication and how we support them out of the box. I'm going to touch on the fact that we've got more APIs out of the box. Going to talk about how it's easier to build your own custom APIs. If our APIs aren't good enough, we can make it easier for you to build your own custom APIs for whatever scenario you need. You've probably heard a couple of times the word service contracts already. I'm going to talk about them a lot more. That is what an extension developer should be thinking about. Somebody writing the PHP code should be talking about service contracts. They should not be talking about REST or SOAP or so forth. I'm going to go through this in a bit more detail. So the other side of it is the service contract is the programmer's access to the various transport protocols. So the solution partner, we want to make it so they can worry about the actual protocols and wire it together. Now, you can always ship something out of the box, but what we're trying to do is to separate those two concerns. So let's run through some of the different needs, different scenarios that come up for authentication. So we don't only support one mechanism, because one mechanism is not good enough. So the first one is, if you've got a JavaScript, you've got a web browser, it's got a bit of Ajax, special widgets going on. Well, if they're already on the site, they've already possibly registered, you've got a session cookie, so they're already authenticated. So basically we've got support for that sort of authentication via the configuration to say, this service should be protected by the session sort of cookie approach. Another one is if you're talking about a mobile app. Well, it's quite common for a mobile application to ask for a username and password. You get their credentials, and that's how you basically authenticate them. You don't know who they are. They haven't been on a browser before, and your application might choose to remember those credentials. There's different ways of doing it. But there's a fairly simple username password API, and it can give you back a token, and then you can use it all for subsequent tokens. And so it's be the normal way we'd expect a mobile sort of API to work. The third sort of case is if you've got more like an enterprise system. So it's a bit of software that's like an ERP system or something or other. There's no human involved. But at the same time, you've got to worry about authentication to make sure that only authorized systems can do access. So for this sort of certain scenario, there's a final sort of method, which is really a long life authentication token. Now, you might have heard that, oh, it's OAuth. Well, just ignore that. It's actually completely irrelevant. The point is it's a long life token that you allocate to the bit of code, because people get confused that, oh, how does that work with user authentication? Well, it's nothing to do with that. We just borrowed an existing protocol to do a handshake approach. Just think about it in terms of being a long life authentication token. So it's a file, you drop it on the machine, and it's how it authenticates through to the digital web store. So we've written all the code for these. You don't have to write code for doing these levels of authentication. So we're trying to take that sort of pain away from people as much as possible. So let's just look at one of them. I like making things concrete. Read off in the documentation and so forth for great details. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of a feel of, this stuff is not particularly hard to do. So for the mobile app situation, if you want to authenticate using a username password, it's a simple request. It's a single HTTP request. You notice it, just send some JSON through with the username and password to a particular URL, and you get a string back. Pretty darn easy. Then in the following requests, such as, this one was just an example of fetching a list of modules, you just have to add an extra header, the authorization header. You put in that particular token with the word bearer in front of it. That's it. So it's not like really complicated to do this sort of authentication. It's hopefully fairly straightforward, as you can see there. So another area that we've been working on is to ship more APIs out of the box. And so a lot more of the modules we've been standardizing APIs. We've been working towards getting each module with its sort of like a well-defined API, one for other modules to use, but also with standardized REST bindings and so forth. So there's a lot more APIs. So there's both the range of APIs we've got right now, and there's a whole range of APIs we've got planned. So we're going to be exposing more and more of these APIs over time. We decided to get some first ones out there, learn a little bit, not hold up releases. And so we've got the first set of APIs. Every release, we're sort of working on more and more, and over time, they'll come out. And if you've got a particular need for a particular API for one of the modules, feel free to let us know. We can look at sort of changing the priority of that sort of stuff. But there's lots of APIs that we provide out of the box. Magento 1, there was this sort of like this one API module. In Magento 2, the APIs are much more in the modules. So that means that any module can expose the API for that module, which gives you more consistency in terms of the API access. One of the problems we had with Magento 1 that we heard about was if you, the business logic and the API sometimes drifted apart because an extension modified the business logic module and didn't modify the API because the API was sitting off to the side. Well, we're trying to get the APIs right alongside the core code, so that if you change the core code and you change the service contract, the mobile API automatically adjusts to it. So how do you work out what APIs on a site? Well, on the top right over there, if you have a look on the DevDoc site, the standard out-of-the-box installation of Magento, we generate all the Swagger documentation for you. If you don't know, Swagger is a way of documenting REST APIs. And so we've generated all that. It's all online. You can just browse through it online. In addition to that, though, as you load modules or remove modules, the APIs change. Because remember, we put the APIs in the modules a lot more. So if you add a new module, you may have additional APIs that weren't there before. So I don't actually have it on the slide, but there's actually a URL that you can get the JSON schema of all our REST APIs, which is the Swagger schema. And you just drop that URL straight into Swagger. So you don't have to install any software. You just bring up the Swagger online site, you drop in that URL, it does magic with JavaScript and a whole lot of things, and it'll actually then tell you the API for your exact site. And so you can actually work out for a particular installation exactly what set of services are available, have been configured. A solution partner might have turned some off, turned other ones off, and so forth. So if you were just as a developer trying to work out what APIs are available on a site, in every module there's a web API.xml, and that's where the REST and SOAP bindings are defined. And you just open them up, and you can actually have a look through what bindings are available for that particular site if you don't want to use the Swagger approach. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about, just as a use sort of case, how would I do something like a product information manager talking through to a Magento web server? So in this case, I can, whenever the PIM decides there's a new product, it'll also work for updates. You can just basically send a HTTP post request over to Magento whenever a new product needs to be created. So what it might do, so whenever you hit the on save or similar sort of button, we can generate a lump of XML. We've got JSON, yes, that is JSON, that is not XML. Minor detail. So when you generate the JSON, we can just do a HTTP post. So we actually support several multiple encodings within Magento. So you can get it so it just posts over the other end. Then how does Magento know what to go off and call? Well, there's a web API.xml file on the other end. You'll notice there it's got like a route, it's got the URL in there, and it says, so when you get a post method going to that URL, it's just binding onto a particular class and a method of it. So the file on the right is the sort of thing a solution partner can fiddle or adjust if they want to for a particular site, just to change the URLs that it's coming in on or expose new services and so forth. Now, is Aaron here, Balance? Do you want to just stand up and wave just for a moment? So this is Aaron from Balance Internet. I'm just doing a short plug for another session we're doing on Wednesday as part of the bar camp. So what Balance Internet had done is we've done a proof of concept using a Kenio glued onto both our order management system and a digital commerce store so that you just hit the save button or whatever in a Kenio and it pushes the updates through. And so they're going to be talking a bit about that demo actually in a bar camp session. So I'm going to talk about the COM integration and then we're showing that demo there. So if you're interested, that's on Wednesday afternoon. And if you've got any questions, you can sort of jump. Unfortunately, it's right towards the end of the conference, so that's why, grab this guy if you want to find out more before then. Okay, so what is a service contract? Can anybody tell me what a service contract is? Great, I'm glad all our training's worked really well. It's a PHP interface. It's a big word. It's actually just a PHP interface. There are a couple of rules around it, but that's about it. But the more important thing is it's been designed for other people outside the module to call in. And so it's more the design concepts behind it. It's sort of saying, here is how we want someone, in this case, to talk to the product repository. It's also been designed to make it easy to bind REST and SOAP API calls on it. And what does that mean? There are some, the argument types, there are some restrictions on the argument types. For example, if you tried to pass a socket, how the hell do you encode a socket in JSON? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So the data structures you pass in and out have got restrictions in them. Basically the arguments, if it's going to be a complex class, there's setters and getters so we can serialize it into JSON and deserialize it out of JSON and recreate the object. But that's it. There's no other special magic to service contracts. They are just PHP interfaces at the end of the day. So in this particular case, you can see here's a product repository interface. This is the actual save method from the previous slides. And so it's just got all the input parameter types. And what our framework does to actually do the JSON and the XML and the SOAP and so forth encoding is it reads that PHP doc block. So the PHP block is very important for service contracts because that's how our engine works out what the types are for all the arguments. And based on that is how we work out what data structures to pass in and return. So the return function is also important. If you're in a SOAP user, so we support SOAP 1.2, if you want to work out the WSDL file, you can just query a system, and we generate the WSDL file on the fly. So it means whatever modules have got loaded up, whatever SOAP APIs have been exposed by modules within that code, you can fetch it. So in this particular case, if you don't want to get a WSDL file for the whole site, you can actually list the list of service names that you actually are interested in, and we'll generate a WSDL for that set of interfaces you want to use. So you can actually get very customized WSDL files if you love SOAP. Everybody loves SOAP, okay. I won't get into that political discussion. So some more just examples running through things. I'm not going to go through this in huge detail, but I'm really just trying to get a little bit of a feeling of the breadth of the APIs we ship out of the box, just to give you, you can fetch products, the URL at the top. We've got search APIs, you can do ors and ands with constraints, and it's got pagination and sorting capabilities in it. I'm not going to spend any particular time on that, but these APIs we supply out of the box. Shopping cart, you can create carts, you can associate carts with customers, you can ask for how much a cart will cost. And so this, one of the questions was Angular. How could you build an Angular API in the front? Well, one approach is to, if you're building a full site experience with Angular, you can use these sorts of REST APIs to build that full experience up on top of our REST. And I don't know why you use SOAP from JavaScript, you wouldn't, but you can use the JSON support and so forth. And so these are the sorts of different services, and this is part of the thing we're trying to do, is just make the APIs more easily available so you can choose how you're going to build your site. We may never say build a full single-page app for Angular, but hey, you guys should be able to if you want to. And so we're making all our APIs available to make that sort of work easier. Okay, so there's really 4 interaction patterns that I like to think about. So there is, on the left, it's asynchronous. Hey, it's either as a consumer or as somebody servicing a request or somebody making a request. On the right side, it's the more synchronous requests. So for example, at the moment, what we've got supported, and I think it's actually coming up on the next slide, is a REST request is number 1. It's got no, it's actually more number 2. So you've got a request that comes in, and we return a HTTP response back, and it's got the data structure for the response. But this will become a little bit clearer on the next sort of slide. So what we want to be able to do is support the different interaction patterns across different protocols. But how do you define these things? Well, if you want to do an asynchronous contract pattern, and I'll describe a little bit more on the next page, basically you just write an interface method with a function and returns void. So if it's void, it knows there's nothing to come back. So that's just the recommended way to do an asynchronous interface. On the synchronous one, you just got the return data structure. So you say, well, this is returning a data structure. Now, in terms of if you want to implement a service, you write a class that implements the interface, which is the box with number 1 on it. If you want to make a service call out to another remote service, you basically write your constructor to say, I want an instance of that interface, and then the dependency injection and so forth wires up and plugs in the actual implementation. Now, I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about the AMQP support. Hopefully it's on the next slide, or else I've forgotten my slides already. But we've got AMQP support for going and coming up very shortly for both inbound and outbound. Right now, it's really number 2 that we've got inbound over HTTP and some inbound for 1 over AMQP. So in Enterprise Edition, we've got AMQP, which is RabbitMQ, uses the AMQP protocol. And so you can receive already in Magento 2.0, if you've got the Enterprise Edition, messages over an asynchronous request. And what we're adding in the next release is support for outbound requests. So all you do is do a function call. That's all the application developer, the extension developer needs to do. They don't know anything about serialization, and I'm jumping ahead of myself. But that's, on the right side, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the only difference is, if I'm doing a synchronous call, you've got to have a return statement to say, here is a data structure to send back over the wire to the client. If it's outbound, you just do a function call and you just use the return value. So it's fairly easy for an extension developer to use these sorts of capabilities. AMQP, I've probably said a fair bit of this one. So what we're trying to do, remember, is separate the transport from the code. So the extension developer can write code and the system integrator can override and put it together any way they like. So AMQP is a great fit for asynchronous requests. It's also got the publisher-subscriber model if you want to broadcast to multiple locations. That's actually what we're going to be doing with the Akeneo integration little demo, because it actually broadcasts a message out, and so both digital commerce and our order management system both pick up that request once. And so it's actually very useful to do broadcasts when you're trying to wire different systems together. HTTP, well, it's actually really good for synchronous sorts of calls. If you've got a request and a response, you get an answer back. We want to flesh out more and more of these protocols for all these different patterns. We want to do more and more over time. We can just continually introduce that into the platform. The application code won't need to change. So if we add in HTTP support for outbound calls, which we're planning to, we're looking at Chuck's the API, frothing at the mouth to try and get webhooks in. So we're looking at these sorts of things in the future, and it'll be almost certainly over the same sort of API sorts of calls, but with different integrations and so forth through configuration. Okay, so custom APIs. So does anybody here have a use case where they want to do a custom API? We've got some out of the box, it's not good enough, you're probably going to want to do your own API at some stage. Anybody got any off the top of your head that you want? Just shout it out, otherwise people won't hear it.
We publish promotions and features on order pages from different systems that aren't actually Magento backend.
So you publish features and pages.
We publish promotions and parts of order pages remotely from other systems.
Okay, you got things like ordered pages coming from other systems. Okay. Anybody else? I'm sorry, I'm repeating for a little bit for the mic and I might mess it up. Yeah, just one more.
We do direct mail postcards, so you may think a postcard is a product which is part of standard API, but selecting a list, including that, would have the
Okay, cool. So here are some of my examples of ones. And I'm sure lots of people, if they think about it, can come up with lots of ones. One that comes up quite frequently is, okay, sure, you've got an API and it's out of the box, but it hasn't been tuned for mobile, and I want to save every single byte of transport. And so if you want to do your own mobile client, you may say, well, I actually want to do 3 requests in one network hop, or I don't want as many fields. We've got some support for printing the number of fields, but you can, when the network communication overhead really matters, can be useful to give you a bit of control. And it's more like oh, I want to create a cart, add 3 items to it and get me a price, but can I do that in one network hop, please? And so that would be an example of why you'd want to create your own API. Another one, we know we haven't finished. We've got a number of modules with APIs already. We haven't got them all done. We're continuing to work on them. If you need it, you can write your own module now and just glue it on and you can get going today. You don't have to wait for us. Or you can create a pull request and we can merge it straight in. The other one, Internet of Things, there's all sorts of different things that are going to come up, and who knows what it's going to be and how much control you are or are not going to have for all these different systems. So what do you have to do? 1, you write your PHP interface. 2, you implement it. This is very difficult stuff, as you can tell so far. You write your web API XML to bind through using those rules like we saw last time. You should review your security settings and the access file to make sure the authentication is writing. And because you've all heard Fu Man's talk before, of course you write your automated test cases. Don't you all? Yeah, I like enthusiasm in an audience. So what I did not say is you don't have to write any JSON or XML serialization code. You didn't have to write any authentication code. By default, we've separated out the configuration from the business logic. We've also done the automatic generation of Swagger documentation for you. So a lot of those sorts of mechanics are done for you. You don't have to waste your time doing that sort of stuff. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to provide a platform to allow you guys to go off and do the interesting stuff, and we'll do the more common platform sort of work for you. So let's look back at Adam and his store. So he's picked a number. To me, I always like bringing this back to real life situations. It's a bit cheesy sometimes, but I always like thinking about, well, what's the reality? Well, why are we really doing this? And it's because people really do need to do these sorts of integrations. It's no longer in this world enough to say, I've got a digital web store and that's all I'm ever going to have to do. I never have to do anything else. The commerce field just keeps growing and emerging and evolving all the time. And there's just more and more systems and more complexity out there. That's actually one of the things that, I came to Magento about 2.5 years ago. And what struck me is it's a lot of the complexity is actually really around the integrations of all these systems. You've got to work out how to fit together into one holistic solution for a customer. That's a lot of the challenge. Now, we obviously are trying to get a platform to make this as easy as possible for other people to do. We can't say this is the only way to do something. We know you've got to get going. You've got to put these things together. You need that power and flexibility. And that's what we've been trying to do with Magento 2, is giving you the tools so that you can do all these integrations yourself. So Adam's, of course, very happy. Life is good. His store is going well. Thank you very much for listening. I blog, as you've probably heard before. Thank you, Anton, for all the plugs. I tend to blog, if you're wondering what I blog about, I tend to blog about future sort of stuff or reasons behind why we're doing things. I actually greatly value community feedback on things. You know, I'm not going to always agree with the feedback, but I'd much rather get it. And so, no, my blog is not a replacement for the online documentation. You don't go there for manuals. It's not manuals. It is personal opinions, but I love getting feedback. If it can help us get that feedback, would be great. I've also got an area on the forums called Just Ask Alan. I don't always get there, but I try my hardest to actually get around and answer questions there. So if you've got any questions, you know, doors open, go for it. And I'll open up for questions. Thank you very much.